Jonah Reed tightened the reins as the old mare came to a reluctant stop. Ahead, 3 figures lay collapsed on the cracked red earth, motionless, half buried in desert dust. The wind tugged at a tattered shawl and lifted a woman's hair from her sunburned face. Jonah sat very still, his fingers on the butt of his pistol, eyes sweeping the empty horizon. No dust of pursuing riders, no sudden shadows, only heat, silence, and that wild, dangerous stillness that meant trouble could be hiding in plain sight. If the smell of saddle leather, the creak of wagon boards, and the taste of red dust still linger in your heart, hit subscribe. These are the kinds of stories that keep the Old West alive. Now, back to the tale. Jonah slid from the saddle and moved among the fallen. The first was an older woman, her shoulders crisscrossed with scars and her wrists bound in rough rope. The second was younger, bleeding and tightly clutching a splintered blade. The smallest, barely more than a girl, curled in on herself, clutching her belly and gasping for breath. Jonah checked them one by one, feeble pulses, but breathing. Alive, barely. He knew it might be a trap. Still, leaving them to the merciless sun felt worse than any ambush. He drew his pocket knife and cut the cords. One by one he lifted them, slinging 2 across his saddle like a heavy burden, coaxing the third up with steady hands. He rode slowly back to the ranch. Slow enough to keep them from falling, fast enough to beat the heat. Inside his small cabin, the hearth's low flames offered little comfort. The 3 huddled against the wall, wrapped in threadbare blankets. Jonah worked quickly but quietly, rinsing wounds with what little clean water he had and wrapping torn shirts around raw flesh. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat, gray eyes fixed on the door, his gun within arm's reach. By dawn, the youngest opened her eyes first. She blinked at the dim light, panic snapping her upright until she saw Jonah. "Don't come closer," she snapped, reaching blindly for a log. Jonah kept his hands empty and his voice calm. "You're safe here. Sit down. I'm not going to tie anyone up." She recoiled, distrust written across her face. 2 others stirred. One woman, tall, hard-eyed, watched Jonah like a blade. The third kept silent, the slow, cautious movements of someone who had been taught to expect worse than kindness. "Who are you?" the hard-eyed woman asked. Her voice rasped from nights spent sleeping with fear as company. Jonah set a bowl of water near the smoldering fire and said nothing more than the truth. "A rancher. I found you in the desert." They didn't believe in saviors, so the old answers didn't help. "Why save us?" the smallest asked later in a dry whisper. "Some things don't need explaining," Jonah answered simply. He passed around a pot of thick porridge, plain, honest corn, and watched the women take the first warm spoonfuls like it was a small miracle. Tears slid down cheeks that had grown used to being ignored. Not from pain, but because someone had offered a seat at the table. Outside, Jonah surveyed the yard. Footprints had rimmed the sand by the broken fence, not his and not theirs. A path winding into the dunes suggested someone had been close last night. When he mentioned it, the youngest's shoulders tensed. "They were near," she murmured. "We're not safe yet." By sunset, Jonah returned from a supply run with a canvas bag of tins and a few old bullets. He reported nothing out of the ordinary to the women. Their silence said enough. The wind sharpened. At dusk, a dark feathered arrow struck the porch post, a warning, not a kill. A small black arrowhead with a red feather dropped into Jonah's palm. The hard-eyed woman's eyes narrowed. "They hunt those who won't bow," she said. They recognized the mark. It was a tribe sign, a public castigation for those who had been cut from their people. The women exchanged looks that needed no words. Old alliances had soured into hate. Jonah put the arrow on the table, like an omen. He suggested watch shifts. The tall woman snapped that she'd take the first watch, slept too long already to be trusted to lie down now. That night, Jonah kept his own vigil on the porch. He listened to the desert breathe and felt for the rhythm of hooves. In the dark, the three women sat near the door, not sharing stories, but sharing a fragile silence. The youngest cradled the arrow and tucked it into a notch in the wall, a reminder that eyes were always watching. Morning arrived with an uneasy quiet. They built defenses, sandbags, boarded windows, nailed extra planks across thin walls. Tools were passed from calloused hands to smaller, uncertain ones. Jonah taught the younger woman how to swing a hammer. She blundered at first, then began to strike with a firm hand. Sweat and dust and purpose braided together into a strange kind of hope. By the third day, a horn sounded across the ridge, long and ceremonial. Not the chaotic thunder of attack, but a summons. Figures poured over the hill, more than 50 warriors, faces painted, spears in hand. At their head rode a man wrapped in deer hide with silver around his brow, the tribe's chief. He did not dismount. Instead, he stood in the courtyard and spoke in a voice that cut through the heat. "I am Chief Korah. Those women are ours. Return them, and you will not be harmed." Jonah walked to the gate and opened the door. "Do you want to hear them speak?" he asked. Nita, the older woman with scarred arms, stepped forward first. "We've heard enough," she said, steady. Saria, the fierce, short-haired one, answered next with a low, defiant growl. "Try to take my life, I'll try to take yours." The chief named their crimes. They had broken taboos, refused arranged marriages, taught forbidden things, loved beyond what the tribe allowed. Offenses that, in the old code, meant erasure. Luma, the youngest, stood at the back holding her belly protectively. "My child will not belong to a tribe that rejected his mother," she said. Their words were quiet but clear. They wouldn't plead for mercy. Chief Korah fixed Jonah with a dark stare. "You accepted them," he said. "Their fate becomes yours. 3 days. Leave before the third sunrise or we'll return and there will be no talk." They left on horseback, with the sun pouring pale dust across the valley. Jonah closed the gate and set the old Winchester on the table. No more words were needed. 3 days, time to prepare, to become more than shelter, to become home. The first morning passed in motion rather than conversation. They worked as if building could stitch the rawness back together. Nita carried planks. Saria shouldered sandbags with a stubborn grunt. Luma learned how to drive a nail straight with Jonah's patient corrections. They planted the first row. Seeds pressed gently into softened furrows, as if coaxing a promise from the earth. Jonah watched the young woman's hands cup the soil. For the first time since she washed up at his gate, a small calm settled over her face. Between tasks, stories leaked out. Nita told of teaching her daughter to read and being punished for it. Saria admitted she'd fought and broken a man who tried to steal her. Luma whispered of the child she carried and the fear of losing him before he breathed. They didn't ask for pity. They only let the work do the healing. Each board nailed, each crack filled with clay. Each row of seeds planted felt like a vow. When the tribe returned on the third day, they brought ritual. They set a stone circle in the yard and low stools in its center. Female elders spoke with the weight of generations and declared the women exiled, names erased from ancestral rolls, ties cut. The verdict echoed across the ranch like a bell toll. Jonah accepted the judgment like a quiet man, taking one more load into his own hands. After they left, the clouds broke and rain, longed for and unexpected, fell. The drops cooled faces gone raw from labor. Rain made the land smell alive. It washed away fresh dust and somehow some piece of grief. For the first time in weeks, the four stood without weapons propped at their side. The rain pooled in the parched garden and the seeds shivered awake under moist soil. Days melted into work. They patched the roof, sealed the windows, sewed kitchen rows that promised food. Luma's belly rounded, and at night the three women and Jonah would sit around a small fire and talk about future plans. A chicken coop, a smokehouse, winter stores. They laughed, small and unexpected, the way a house learns to be a home. One morning, Jonah climbed onto the porch and placed a carved wooden token, 3 imperfect overlapping circles, into a ledge above the door. Not a flag, not a claim, but a symbol. Here we stand. They hung the sign as sunlight cast a long shadow across the yard. A season passed in miniature. Hot days, muffled storms, and the slow greening of the first seedlings. Food was modest, but shared without ceremony. They ate, fixed, planted, and slept without staying trapped by fear. Life returned in the small details. Someone humming while mending a sack. A whistle played on a cracked little tune. A pot of coffee steaming on the table on cold mornings. Evenings became gentle. Their voices traded stories, lullabies, childhood memories, and small triumphs. Jonah found himself listening differently. The ranch had been his solitude for a long time, but now solitude softened into companionship. Each of them, in their own way, had been broken and had chosen to keep building. When night finally came and the stars watched over the yard, none of them slept with hands clenched on weapons. Not because danger had vanished, but because something else had arrived. Trust, slow, fragile, and earned. In the quiet aftermath of those long days, Jonah thought of his own losses, family gone to some other silence, and felt, for the first time in years, a weight unfasten inside him. He had come to this land to keep out the world, and ended up letting it in. He had saved 3 lives, and they had saved something of his own heart. This is a story about what happens after the dust settles, about how healing rarely arrives with noise and thunder. It comes with shared bread, with hands that learn to build again, with stubborn people who refuse to let exile define them. They chose to stay. They chose to work. They chose each other. If this small, quiet story touched something in you, a memory of starting over, or someone who stood by you when the world said leave, then join us, subscribe, and stay for the next chapter of stories from the far west. Tales of second chances, stubborn hope, and the people who make a place feel like home.